everyone, and welcome to the seventh episode of Host a Pro, where disruptive influencers talk about e-commerce marketing. Today, we have an amazing guest with us, Shama Hyder. Hey, Shama.
Hi, Rakifet.
Uh, really amazing guest, and we're super honored. Shama is the founder and CEO of Zen Media. She's been named the Zen Master of Marketing by Entrepreneur. Forbes, Business Week, Inc. have all recognized her as one of the top 30 under 30 entrepreneurs in the field of marketing. Again, super honored to have you here, Shama. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on your, looks like it's a nighttime talk show.
Yeah, according to the background, we're in the city of New York. So, where are you located right now?
I'm actually in Miami, but New York is one of my favorite cities, so I'm happy to play along.
Yeah, same here. I'm actually in Tel Aviv, but we'll play the New York game today. So super excited to have you here. Today we're going to speak about PR for e-commerce brands. And before we jumped into all the what's and how's, first, is it really important for e-commerce brands that are starting to grow, starting to pick up and really gain traction to actually start with PR, and why?
Yeah, only if you want to have trust of your customers and you so, it's funny because I think PR for the longest time was like nice to have, with media relations and whatnot. It's just like a nice perk. It's a lot of times I think companies felt like, oh, if you get a certain point, then you can look into it. But these days we know that's just not true because you only have to look at how many touch points someone needs to buy. I know, Forrester just released some research and they shared that in 2017, for example, it took 17 touch points interactions for someone to buy, and now it's 21. So
Yeah.
that number is going up. We also know that trust is continuously going down. People don't look at something and say, oh, I'm so excited to buy it. Usually they think, what's the catch? Are these reviews real? Is this company going to deliver? This is really true for e-commerce, right? Also, if you were ever competing with Amazon, or even like if you've got a brand on Amazon, you're trying to build up your brand. As so many brands have realized, Amazon's a great platform, but at the end of the day, it's the Amazon brand. And what you want to do is build your brand. And so from that perspective, PR becomes essential, not like a nice to have, not like something we can add later. I also find it, sort of fascinating. A lot of times we work with clients and we do a lot in the B2B tech space. It's because they know that they want to one day exit or they have already a game plan. You mentioned Tel Aviv. We worked with a few VC funded startups out of Israel. And part of that is the same thing. How do we position ourselves? Because we know today it's not just about the product. It's not just about the service. It's the story that you tell. It's the story your customers get to tell about that product, about that service, how they feel about it. And so for all those reasons, PR becomes pretty crucial.
Yeah, it's amazing because a lot of the times, e-commerce brands that are getting started are very much focused on the funnel, on the numbers. I get traffic, I get this conversion rate on my website, and, I'm just handling that funnel. And sometimes PR is not, the first thing they would do, right? Yeah, it would be, the basics first.
Yeah, the thing with this is you have to realize part PR, if well done right, media relations done right, is a key component of that funnel, right? It's the demand that you're generating, it's the awareness. It's like you could have the best product in the world, but if nobody knows about it, then how are they, then you're not getting customers. It is also the long game, right? So unlike advertising, which is you put an ad out, you pay, you get, clicks, you have a certain percentage of conversion. It's not as direct. It's not like someone reads an article, then you're paying for that, then they go and they click. It's much more it becomes part of that ecosystem of like why we love certain brands. And so I will say this, I don't think PR is right for every brand. I think for someone who feels like they are not in it for the long haul, and by long haul I don't even mean like years and years, but if you're not playing the game, like if you don't care about building your brand, then it's not as important. If all you care about is selling this supplement, for example, and you're happy driving ads, and then you don't need PR, right? Like don't um
Yeah.
but if the goal is to build a brand, and also a lot of times what we see is CEOs or entrepreneurs, and they say, listen, this isn't my only baby. I want to go on to do more I want to be on boards, or I want to establish myself using this company, so then that lets me attract more opportunities. I mean, part of PR is that it leads to other opportunities. And I mean, in business, if you think about it, that's really what you're after, is more opportunities to grow, to get more market share. But you've got to have that mindset for it to be able to, for you to play in that realm.
Yeah, and with such a competitive market out there, I guess as we go forward, if you don't build your brand, you're probably going to lose even in the short term, not only in the long term.
Absolutely. I mean, you can look at so many e-commerce brands. I mean, I think e-commerce is actually one area that they've done a great job, in brand building, and media relations has to be a key part of that. Look at a brand like Yeti. I mean, Yeti does, high-end coolers, but at the end of the day, it's a cooler where you put, drinks, and they've got
Yeah,
tons of brands, huge. So a lot of e-commerce is commodity. You're selling commodities, but the truth is, it's the thing that's differentiating is brand. So, like, you don't ask for batteries, right? You ask for Duracell, or you ask for Energizer, or we, in the States, we ask for Kleenex. We don't ask for facial tissue. And part of it is because these brands over time have invested in themselves. Like, people ask for them by name. They are the category leaders. So it's ideal for someone who wants to be the market leader, who wants to be out there and reap those benefits. It's not for someone who's looking to say, how can I, get an article out there and then it'll cause a rush of, traffic to our site. That's generally not how it works.
yeah, yeah. So basically, right now, PR. What is PR in the digital world? I mean, we're talking about digital marketing, brands investing in digital. PR is not the traditional PR it used to be. So what it is today?
Yeah, that's a great question. It has components of that, right? So if you look at PR, which really means, stands for public relations, but the public is broad. So it's, your media, your shareholders, your stakeholders, your investors. It's that, and it's, your influencers. So who is media has so rapidly changed. So if you look at media relations, it's no longer traditional journalists at desks. Like, you could have desk side meetings. All of that's changed. It's much more how you're connecting with people, who's got an audience that you can leverage to get your message out there. And I think that's the thing that's so key.
So what type of PR would you recommend for e-commerce brands that are, they want to start scaling. They understand, the machine is working, people love their product. Now it's time to scale and they want to invest in PR. What type of PR would you recommend doing?
Yeah, for e-commerce brands, digital PR, what we're talking about is very par for the course, right? It's the thing is, depending on your product, if you have a consumer-based product, there might be, let's say it is in the nutrition space, you can have multiple publications that deal with nutrition. But then let's say you have got a really good founder story. There's great entrepreneur elements to that. So there's the consumer side press, there's business side press. I mean, really what you're looking for is, a holistic effort to increase your visibility, to increase your credibility. Because let's face it, we don't trust what companies say, right? We trust what other people say, what, third party verification, which that's what you guys are about. And we were just talking about this off camera, right? It's because if everyone says, I'm the best, like, that's what, when you go into a marketplace, you're bombarded, and it's like, who do you believe? And so part of this is that third party credibility validation. And so that's the kind, you're really looking. And to me, I always say, look for the folks that walk their talk. And one of the things that we at Zen have done really well, I think, we walk our talk. We get a lot of clients who say, do for us what you've done for you guys. And that's great. Like, I don't like preaching what we're not practicing, right? So if you go to
Yeah.
our blog, you'll see content. If you see press, we talk about ourselves, we land ourselves media too. How can we realistically say this is helpful if then we are not, right? We're not doing it for ourselves. So I do think it makes, when you're checking for that, look for someone who understands that inherently and is comfortable, and like, they're eating their own dog food, so to speak.
Yeah. So basically, influencers is also part of the game, right? for example, what you do
Yeah.
for the media, but also, influencers are a type of PR.
It's a huge part. I mean, I would say so much of our work right now, almost 50% is influencer related, right? So again, if you're and especially B2B influencer marketing is just starting. So if you're in B2B e-commerce, there's a whole another area there. But it absolutely, because the idea of media is reach, is visibility, it's credibility, it's these guys are legit. And influencers can give you that. So yeah, I mean, we've had great success with influencers. They're not necessarily bound by traditional journalist kind of protocols that you see, and that gives them more creativity. You could do more fun stuff. I remember we did one for a client of ours, which we teamed up with a YouTube influencer and did a slime challenge, right? And part of it was so nicely integrated because within that slime challenge we incorporated the client and a call to action. And so it was something that, so with influencers, it takes a little more strategic effort too, because it's not as simple as a journalist on a beat. You've got to see who's their audience, where do they thrive. I mean, some influencers are great on Instagram, others are great on YouTube. So you've got to look at all these things. And same, if you work with influencers, you can't expect that they're going to put this out there and then see a barrage of sales. It doesn't work that way. That it's much more of a, someone will come, they will experience that. Yes, you may have a few people go by right away, but much more likely is that they will discover it over hashtags when they're searching. It's your reputation. So there is that sort of, I don't even want to call it the long tail, but it's it's almost like the messy middle. And
Yeah.
Think by Google they have a white paper on this where they look at it and they say how we think decisions are made, which is trigger buy. Doesn't work that way. We know now that it's trigger, then you kind of get in this loop of evaluation and exploration, right? And between these two little, I love
Yeah.
this,
You
between
can
these two
have breaks in
evaluations,
the middle and,
yeah, they're
complex.
constantly evaluating, they're exploring, and then as these two merge, then they're making that purchase. And then outside of all of this is exposure. So the more they see the brand over and over and over, that's what's getting them to buy, right? Like
Yeah.
that's essentially what drives the, but what we look at is marketers especially are still hung up on attribution. And if you're used
Yeah.
to doing performance based type of marketing, you're like click, convert, click. The world doesn't work that way. And it's funny because if you ask these same people, how do you buy something? Do you go there, you click and convert? No. Chances
Yeah.
are your friend told you about it and then you heard about it somewhere else and then you put it, back of your mind, and then you read something on Forbes and you're like, "Oh yeah, I remember that." It takes so many touch points, and then what do? You go into Google, you type it in, you buy it, and they say, "Guess what? You're getting all this from Google." No, that's just the gateway. So
Mm,
Google used to be like the starting point. Now it's really just the gateway to having the final. So yeah, I think there's a lot
mm.
of attribution error issues there, but knowing how decisions are made and being okay with that messiness, being knowing that your customers are coming from many ways, and the focus for e-commerce companies should should be not like that immediate conversion, which is great, but how do you get that lifetime value for a customer? Because for so many e-commerce
That,
customers, our clients, we have so many e-commerce clients, that first sale is a loss. Doesn't matter where they come from. Their customer acquisition cost is so high, which is another great thing which PR does. If you done right, it reduces that customer acquisition cost. But you can't necessarily track that as to like what happened here, right? But over time, as you build trust in the marketplace, you're going to see that. And so a lot of times we have e-commerce clients, and if they sell like, especially commodities or like, let's say pens or whatever, then what's happening is that they might lose money on the pen, but the
yeah.
lifetime value of someone who bought a pen and then buys a cover, right, gets their phone, or gets, this is a fun little this is kind of cool. All right, magic, mugs, whatever it is, your lifetime value of your customer is far greater. And so I think you have to play, coming back to what works in PR and media relations for e-commerce companies, is what works for a lot of other industries, which is you got to play the long game.
Yeah.
So it's not advertising, and so you cannot confuse the two.
Yeah, and when prices just rise, just really increase within the space of paid advertising, again, there is no other way than investing in your brand and thinking long term and lifetime value. And these are exactly the things that will support that.
Yeah, and again, your brand, you can tell people what your brand is all day long. The question is, will they believe you? And the answer is probably not, because we don't tend to believe, right? What someone says about themselves, or especially companies say about themselves. I think what you see now naturally is, the modern consumer is a lot more skeptical. They're not going like, "Oh yeah, that's a great idea." It just that's not how it works.
True. Are there any common mistakes brands do with PR?
Yeah, so a couple we've actually already hit. One is thinking that it works like advertising. It does not, right? You can't, you're looking at credibility, but it's to think one article is going to get you your sales is not the way it works. So you really
Yeah.
do have to have the right mindset. The other is, expecting quick results. I mean, yes, you'll see progress right away. I mean, with our clients, we get hits right off the bat, frankly, because we don't work with clients that we don't feel like we can place. So we're selective in that way. If there's nothing special, if there's no like, special sauces and the founder stories in there, or like, the brand's not like you. What I always tell people is PR is great, and what we do best is we add sizzle to steak, but you can't manufacture steak. You have to have a good product. Your basics have to be sound. So let's say, expecting really marketing or PR to be a band-aid for business issues, which is often the case, is a terrible mistake, right? Because it amplifies what you have. If you've got a good product, PR and stuff can amplify it to best things in sliced bread. If you
Yeah.
have a average or poor, it's not great. All you're going to do is amplify that. So these are a couple of things to watch out for. And then also, again, thinking that this is so common because we live in our businesses, and I can think as an entrepreneur too, and I think both as an agency owner and entrepreneur, but as running a business, it's so easy to get caught up in that and think because it's your world, it should be everybody's world. And
Mhm.
so I tell people, you're not going to end up on the cover of, Vanity Fair. Your business is not going to be in the front page of the New York Times. Like, yes, does it happen? Yes, but are those good goals? Not really, because it's so funny. People think like getting on the cover of New York Times or even is like the most. And the funny thing is, it's not the thing that makes or breaks a brand. It's that consistent, continuing, you know, this is a good example, Rakafet. I've been doing videos and podcasts and keynote speaking for the last, I don't know, like 15 years. Sorry, I don't know why I said I don't know, 15 years. So I've been doing it for a really long time, right? And part of that is as you get busy, as my agency's grown, I have to prioritize and say no to things. And I do stuff across the board. I do a lot of television. I do national television. I do stuff for NPR, like across the board, Fox Business. And so, as easy as it is for me to be like, oh, this is your seventh episode, this is a new podcast, like, but that's not how it works. And I know that's not how it works. So this is also
Yeah.
what I go back to saying, like, I practice what I preach. I think it's important. You say yes to every media opportunity that you can. Now, given that it's your audience, you can provide value. That's a good fit. That's what you're looking for. So you check the boxes based on that, right? Like, hey, I'm about B2B. This is a B2B video cast, podcast. The audience is an audience I love. We work with these. My examples will make sense. So it's a mutual win. But when you look at that, but you can't say like, oh, but is it in the top 10 in iTunes yet? Maybe, maybe not. But you don't know, and I think this is true. I'll say this is interesting. I think this is also really true of how certain leaders treat people too. Like you see people who are very transactional. And I think there's a fine line. Actually, it's a very thick line between transactional and being efficient. So you can still be efficient and say no to things. I say no to things all the time, but
Yeah.
it's not because I think they're too small or like, oh, this outlet's not important enough. Just like that person, it's like, no, everybody you encounter, maybe you have time for them, maybe you don't, whatever it is. But if you can add value and you have the ability to, and you have, the bandwidth, then I think you absolutely should. So many times, you see companies are like, oh, if it's not, if
Mm,
it's not the cover of this, then what's the point? And that's not how it works. And again,
yeah,
you can tell the leaders who know the name of the front desk folks, they know the janitor, they know, like, these are the same people that understand how this works, how relationships work. Some of
yeah,
our best placements for clients have been because we followed these journalists all the way through their career. And do you think
yeah,
they're going to take a call from us? Absolutely. One, because they know we won't waste their time, and two, because they worked with us. Like, again, so much of this business is a relationship business. And I think the challenge with e-commerce is it can feel like it's not, because it's so shopping cart, buy button now. It
yeah.
feels
People might
right.
be confused within
Yeah.
that,
Yeah,
sphere.
and it feels automatic. So you're like, oh, it's just clicks, but behind clicks and users, and even the language you use. Look at e-commerce. The language used is clicks and visitors and users, but the closest you get is customer, right? But every customer, every click is a human being, and they're coming at it from their own lens and their own, whether they trust it or not. And so, understand if you understand that, then I think those are the brands that tend to do really well with PR.
Amazing. And for obviously lots of value, and we're super grateful to have you here, even though it's our seventh episode.
And I'm thrilled to be here. As I said, it's not about the audience size. It's much more about, can you like, my checklist is not audience size. And I
Yeah,
tell clients, your checklist shouldn't be audience size. It should be, is this something I like talking about? Is this aligned with what you're trying to do? Don't do, like, if someone invited me to a podcast on knitting, right? And it was like the number one knitting podcast, I still would say no, because I'm like, what
yeah,
what value am I going to add to these knitters when I don't know how to, like, so it's, those are the things that you're really looking an alignment for. And again, people get so, I think when they think PR, they think it's got to be big media hits, but it's not. It's about doing these things and creating that visibility, and again, those relationships, right?
yeah,
If someone, for example, is watching this and they're just like, oh, I'm just starting e-commerce, like, this isn't, you know if this is helpful, then that's awesome, and that's what makes me happy. So that's like a checklist on, for me. And it's not a, you've got to, for me, I don't look at this and think, well, how many clients or prospects did we get from that one? Not how it works. And I think when
true.
you have that very transactional mentality, and again, very different than being efficient or effective or saying no. By all means, say no to all the things that don't align with what you're trying to do. But don't let these vanity metrics
Yeah.
throw you in what you're trying to build and what you're trying to do.
I love calling that marketing karma. Eventually, you build your karma around
Yeah.
marketing,
Yeah.
and you're connecting with the people that are aligned with your values, aligned with your audience, allow with with what you want to give to the world. Eventually, it
Yeah.
works. So for e-commerce brands that are debating right now, they didn't start PR. What would you
Mhm.
say? Would be the best tip you can give them right now?
Start. Yeah, my best tip is start, because the thing is, you also don't, so many times we'll start with a client and we sit down, we come up with angles, we think about all the different ways in which we can, position them, different for influencers, different for journalists, whatever it may be. What's funny though, Rakefet, is as you get into it, you learn things and you discover things. Like, sometimes I may think this piece of content is going to do awesome, right? And you put that out there, and then it doesn't. And you're like, wait, I thought, and then the thing that you just kind of put out there, you're like, okay, well, let's try this angle. All of a sudden, that's what people want.
True.
So go figure, right? Like, it's,
So
yeah. So I think I think that often is the case. Also, I think, um sharing value, same thing. Like, as you do, when you can find valuable things to share, create, like, one of our clients, for example, is Adroll. And Adroll has great data because they have over 20,000 customers. They're a great company, and they're in the e-commerce business, right? And so if we have that great data, and we can share insight with reporters and say, by the way, like, look how e-commerce has jumped, or look what's happening. If you can be a friend,
Yeah.
okay, to and I think it's so funny, but I think friendship, and if you think about it sort of broadly, is how what makes for a good friendship. You provide value, you build a relationship, and I think you have to be willing to do that. You have to be able to willing to build the relationship. There's a great story, and I forgive me, I don't remember where I heard it. I just remembered the story, but it was Katharine Hepburn, and a reporter called her and said, I would like to interview you, and she said, are you kidding me? I've got back to back, movies to shoot. I've all this stuff. It's not my job to do interviews. And he paused, and on the other line he said, yes, I understand. He said, but it is my job.
Hmm.
And she said, I'll meet you downstairs in 15 minutes.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Right? But that's kind of it. Like, your job is not everybody's job. But if you can help people get what they're looking for, if you go to a reporter and you say, I've got this, look at the insight that we've shared, or look, I always tell clients, what can you teach? And so if you've got a startup that's got a great trajectory, or something really fascinating, or let's say someone was, a stay-at-home mom and they invented something, and then they, learned from their experiences with their children, like, hey, this is missing, and then they did, that's great. That's a story, right? That's a great angle. So that you're giving, it's about part of so much of what I do. I feel like what we do is we connect the dots. And so you've got to, and sometimes it takes a minute to figure out what dots need to be connected. But the cool thing is, when it starts to get going, when it starts to build momentum, it's unstoppable. I mean, just actually last week, we got a call from a morning show here, and for a client that we pitched a year ago, and it was in the producer's files. So you think sometimes you put stuff out, you're like, what's happening? Nothing hit. Okay. But a year later, they're like, oh yeah, I remember that. We're doing a segment on your client's industry. We'd like them to come on as a guest on the show. So you've got to get that wheel turning and just be open to those opportunities, because they do come flooding in.
Yeah. Beautiful. Connection and friendship and giving value, and eventually it's what we're all about. So definitely. Shama, thank you so much for being a guest on our show. It was an honor. Super interesting, super valuable for sure. I hope you all heard that and start doing PR. Thank you
Yeah, I
so
mean,
much.
thanks, Rekafat. I appreciate it. And yeah, absolutely. Look into PR if you're an e-commerce company. Find a good fit. That's the other thing I'll say. It's not something that you can do yourself. Whether you decide to hire in-house, you work with an agency, find the one that's a fit for you, that really speaks to you, because not everyone is going to be a fit. But by all means, do your homework, find, and then stay in it for the long haul, because that's the other thing. This isn't like a campaign which you turn on and off. This is
Yeah.
where you invest and you really commit to building your brand.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Have a
Thanks for
great
having
night,
me.
great day.